I'm happy to be here as well, and happy to introduce our panelists. So Leigh Cherry has been a founder partner of Cherry and Martin, which is a gallery here at the fair, if you don't know their program, but it's also one of the galleries you absolutely have to visit in Los Angeles, and they've established themselves with emerging artists, mid-career artists, and also doing historic shows that have given them a very particular place in the ecosystem of Los Angeles.
Thank you.
And Thao Nguyen, who is an agent at CAA, which you may have heard of, and also curates the art. But as an agent, Thao represents artists in the broadest sense: creatives, designers, Yves Behar, Rem Koolhaas, what a list, Steve McQueen. And she also curates their contemporary art collection. Thanks for joining us. We have Philipp Kaiser, who I first met when he was a curator at MoCA, went on from there to head of the Ludwig Museum, and is now working as an independent curator doing shows. And you're going to be part of the Art Basel team next year. That's right. That's right. What is it called? What is your section called?
It's called Public Section.
So curating the public section for Art Basel, and just recently curated a show at the Broad Museum in Los Angeles, Cindy Sherman, Imitation of Life, which was worth seeing. And Lita Albuquerque, our final panelist, whose work is here. I was going to say here at the fair, which is true as well. You have some pigment pieces at the Cone booth, yes, which are extraordinary.
Cone Gallery, yes.
Yeah, the Cone booth, Michael Cone's gallery booth. And Lita is a groundbreaking artist who I have admired for many, many years, and so I'm so happy to have you on the panel with us. I feel like you've done all the things that are now so trendy, but you did them before they were trendy, and you do them in a more authentic way. Site specificity, ephemerality, performative elements, and it's a pleasure to have you all with us. And to start this conversation about the LA art scene. You may have heard that there's a lot going on in the LA art scene right now. It's a pretty dynamic place to be. But depending on who you ask, you may hear very contradictory things about the market. And I just wanted to read a sampling of the kinds of things I've been hearing and reading for the last couple of years. For example, everybody in Hollywood is buying, or nobody in Hollywood is buying. There's never been a better time to run a gallery in Los Angeles. Or the small and mid-market, mid-level galleries are really struggling to survive. And lastly, to get to the peg for this panel, which is really tied to the fact that so many New York and European galleries have expanded and opened branches in Los Angeles. One of the things you'll hear is that these new galleries, the mega galleries like Hauserwerth and Schimmel and Spruth Magers, are radically transforming the LA art world. And then you'll also hear on the ground from people that Hauserwerth and Schimmel and Spruth Magers really have nothing to do with the LA art world, or very little to do with it. And so you have a lot of competing kind of perceptions, maybe misperceptions as well, about what's going on in the market here in LA. And I thought, given our wonderful mix of panelists, that we could start by trying to get, at some of the changes underway. So I wanted to ask each of you, and we can just go around for this particular question. If you can tell us about, describe one change, or maybe what you think is the most important change at the gallery level that you've seen or experienced over the last, let's say, 5 or 10 years, and how has it affected the work that you do as a gallerist or agent or curator or artist? And Leigh, would you like to start with
I'll
that?
start. Well, I had sort of thought about it as, obviously I'm the gallerist representative on the panel, but I had thought about it in the tightly knit web that we are in Los Angeles, which is quite a bit different sometimes, I think, than in, say, New York, where we work really closely with like all the entities, and not that it doesn't happen in other major cities, but we do work very closely with the museums. So for me, from the gallerist side, it actually, the changes are coming from not other galleries, but have come from museums, museum directorships. So I know it's more than 10 years, but in 1999, when Annie Philbin came to LA to the Hammer and brought James Lane and rebooted sort of the Hammer Project series, that was a really big time of change. I think that the scene and the gallery scene even right prior to that had been pretty quiet and small. You could go to every single gallery in a weekend. And then you get cut to, and everyone I hope knows what Annie has done at the Hammer. But then 2006, Michael Govan comes, and they're both coming from New York. So he comes to LACMA. And then I would say, then to get to the point of your question, I found the New York Times article that you didn't write, but it came from a New York perspective on May 1st of 2015, and it was called Los Angeles and its booming creative class lures New Yorkers. And I would say that single article, it was like the next day, LA was different because it was okay for New Yorkers to like Los Angeles publicly. And that was, I'm serious. It was.
People also hated that article. You know that.
Oh, I know, I'm sure. But it was a big change. And I think that so many people were given like the okay to move to LA and not complain about it and embrace it for what is so great about it. And LA doesn't have those conversations, though. We don't talk about it at all. It's more like a London, New York thing, always talking about LA and how you can make it there, living, having a gallery, being an artist, or are there collectors? And I think that that article was a pretty big deal. Everyone was talking about it. And I went back, I was like, what was that article last year? So.
Well, one of the many articles that LA is the new New York, you know, because Brooklyn can't be the new Manhattan any longer, and we've done that and seen that.
Yeah.
You know, Manhattan is the new Manhattan, and LA is the new.
Yeah.
So I mean, the comparisons go on and on.
Yeah.
But that is part of the change that's happened in the last 10 years too, is the amount of media attention.
Yeah,
that
it's a
LA
huge
has
amount of
gotten.
media attention. Yeah.
Thao?
I come from the agency side. I think in the last decade, there has been a growing movement of many creatives to LA. And I think not just artists, but you've got Silicon Beach, you've got artists, you've got galleries, all migrating to LA. And I think that's particularly exciting from an agency point of view because, you know, LA's naturally a very collaborative city. And when you have a confluence of all of these different types of creatives, it creates a lot of new opportunities. And from the agency perspective, we find that particularly very exciting. But also at the same time, you know, when you have this migration of all of these creatives, there has to be a sustainable strategy. And our belief is that great galleries, the good galleries, help sustain the cultural production, the ideas, nurturing talent, nurturing ideas, and they serve a very vital role in our communities. So from our perspective, galleries are very, very important, and they will continue to be important, particularly the good galleries. I know there's been a lot of conversation about galleries being obsolete. You know, the bad galleries, of course, they can't sustain themselves, but the good galleries, they are very, very vital to the community, and you know, they're very, very, very important. So thank you for the good work.
Thank you.
Well, I remember when I moved to Los Angeles 10 years ago, and I was like the only European. It was very complicated to hire me at the museum. And there were very few people, there were very few dealers that were interested in Los Angeles, and they were always contacting me before they came. Now I miss them, it has changed. But Christian Nagel, for example, he showed up regularly. And we also shouldn't forget when we talk about this exchange with Sprüt Magers that, for example, Max Hetzler had a gallery in the early 90s. And Tim Neuger from Neuger Riemschneider worked in Los Angeles and brought a lot of these artists in the 90s he created an awareness in Basel, at the Kunsthalle in Basel, for example, where I worked at that time. I saw all these shows. They had their first big shows outside of the United States. And over the years, it has really changed. Now you can really feel there are a lot of French people. Whenever you go to the Gelsons, to the grocery store, I bump into all these French people. There's a huge community out there. There was a big German community, Austrian community. And next year, there are many museum groups coming. Like the Ludwig Museum is coming with a group in January. The Museum of Modern Art from Frankfurt is coming. The Düsseldorf group was here like about a month ago. In Los Angeles. So it's really changing, and I think there's a huge awareness. And in terms of the galleries, I mean, maybe we can talk later about the reasons why these galleries opened their branches in Los Angeles. I mean, some of the reasons, maybe in the early 90s for Max Hetzler, were kind of a given because of Kippenberger, who lived in Los Angeles in 1989, while at the same time, Mike Kelly from Los Angeles had his first big show at Jablonka in Cologne. I mean, they were kind of changing their, they were also close friends and liked each other. And I think that's a very interesting moment. And nowadays, when we talk about Sprüt Magers and Hauser Wirth Schimmel, of course, they operate on a very different level. And for Schimmel, Hauser Wirth, it totally makes sense also with all the estates they represent and also many Los Angeles artists. Ivan has always showed many, many of the LA artists in Switzerland, for example, and I've seen Jason Rhodes in the late 90s in Hamburg, all over the place. So this kind of transatlantic exchange has been going on for quite a while. I would say maybe like 25 years, and it's not really new. It's probably the most, it might be the peak, or it might be stronger than 25 years ago, but it's been going on for a while.
Thank you. I think all of you brought up the what is behind. You know, you can't just talk just about the galleries, but how everything is connected. Bringing up Anne Philibin and Govan and what they've done, and then they bring this incredible energy and people who come to that. When I found out about the question, I had this interesting kind of take on it, and one of the people I thought also shifted the scene some is Jeffrey Deitch. In that, I come from the old school. I mean, I've been in LA since the early 70s, I'd say, in terms of in the art scene. So I've seen a lot. I was on the original Artist Advisory Committee for MoCA. We actually started the whole museum. So I've seen a lot of changes, and I sort of like to hang on to the old. But when Jeffrey Deitch came, he was interested in bringing in a lot of performance art, a lot of younger artists. And I am also in touch with a lot of the underground scene of performance and dance, and that brought in that whole scene in. And so that, and galleries started being interested in that, and I think that really has affected the scene. In terms of galleries, I know that my gallery, Michael Cohn, moved from one space to a much larger space in Hollywood. And with him moving there next to Reagan Projects, brought in a lot more galleries, and it's a gorgeous space. So and he's able to do historical shows, which brings again a whole other way of looking at art. And I think that's one of the, definitely.
It makes me wonder whether you each think, or I don't know. It makes me wonder whether LA will ever have a gallery center, and whether that would be a good thing or not.
No,
I don't think
so. I want to see the
No.
reactions here.
Never.
How
That would be
many
nice.
gallery centers can LA have? Is my follow-up to that.
4, 5, 6.
Right now,
Well,
we're
I
at
like
5, maybe.
We're at 5. I like to smush them all together, though. Like, I like to say Culver City goes up to the
Verdansk.
Yes.
La Brea, West Hollywood, Hollywood corridor.
Right. Down to downtown.
That's all one district.
I just think the way that LA is designed, the sprawl, sort of enables different artistic communities and different creative hubs. So, and hence, you have these different, areas in the city where you've got a concentration of galleries. And I don't think we're ever going to have one. And I think that's I think that's because of the way the city is designed.
I mean, you could even argue that we don't have one downtown. That people say downtown like they know where it is, and people are talking about wildly different parts of the area, you know, south of the 110.
Well, LA was
east of the
never
10.
one city anyway.
Right.
It was 7 or however many put together.
And
Well,
so-
Yeah.
But I do think that Hauserworth Schimmel bringing that to downtown gave it a fulcrum, gave it a center in a way, and then all the galleries there are connected because of that. So and the fact that there is so many Europeans, so many New Yorkers who are moving here, and a lot more artists. I'm on the core faculty of the graduate program at Art Center, so I see that whole wave, and they stay here now, whereas before they'd go to New York. So that's really...
And it's also stunning, you know, how the art scene has moved. I remember when I moved to Los Angeles, that was kind of the end of Chinatown.
Yes.
But it wasn't the end. Maybe there was like another 2 or 3 years, and then it was kind of gone. And then everyone moved to La Cienega. You guys are still there, but it's great because there is Susanne Wilmeter, Blum and Poe, and you guys. But it's very few galleries. I mean, there used to be more, but it's also complicated because I believe the Culver City, they have restrictions on alcohol at the openings. They started to...
And parking.
Yeah, and it was on parking,
signage,
and it got very complicated. So many of the galleries moved, like Cohn Gallery, to Highlands. And living on the east side myself, I have to say I really enjoy it, that the galleries and everything seem to move, even if there's still various centers, but it seemed to move east. And downtown with Mara McCarthy and the Box, you know, who was there actually before Paul and Hauserwirth. And but I feel, yeah, it's changing. Downtown has become very active. Also Koreatown, on the way, there are these pockets on the way to Highland, for example, with amazing galleries. Rena Spalling's just opened in MacArthur Park, which is kind of a iffy neighborhood. It's a funky place. When you come from New York City, it might be cool, but when you live in LA, it's a little...
You don't want to go there.
Yeah, you don't really want to go there. But except for Langer's, there's this deli.
Oh, yeah.
That's really good. But it's interesting. I mean, as the galleries really try new pockets also that connect the various centers, especially...
It
these
also
galleries.
allows for there's different architecture, so it allows for different types of gallery spaces. And we see that. The galleries aren't just necessarily opening, I mean, they're, for the most part, clean white boxes, but they're different in the different parts of the city. So I think that makes it more interesting.
One of the things I've noticed with the galleries is that before they were a lot more competitive with each other, and now it feels like there is much more of a gallery community because the eyes are on Los Angeles, and they're much more of a camaraderie amongst the galleries. So it feels a lot more cohesive. I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I always thought one of the things that did Chinatown in was that they couldn't actually organize. You have galleries so close to each other they couldn't open on the same night. or me personally, like I wish they would have been able to do that. But there are still some galleries in Chinatown as well. And you had mentioned, Philipp, Hauserwirth and Schimmel moving in and working with some of the estates or artists close to home. And that is where the title of this panel comes from. So I just wanted to mention it, the proximity factor. The idea being, and I think they pulled this from an article I wrote a year ago, where everybody was talking about Hauserwirth and Schimmel and Spruth Magers moving in kind of to Los Angeles, getting more space, reaching new collectors, and it seemed to me that there was one big unspoken reason. People would talk about it, but it wasn't making it into the press. One real reason they were moving there, and that was to be close to the incredible number of talented Los Angeles artists. And we've seen already, I mean, Spruth Magers is going to be showing Lynn Folks in January and Analia Saban in the summer. And Hauserwirth and Schimmel represents Mark Bradford, who did not have representation in Los Angeles. So this idea of the proximity factor, that you need to be close to your artists. Now, I know not all of you are gallery owners, but do you feel that's important, that the galleries be close to where the artists live?
Absolutely. I think this is also a paradigmatic shift that happened, or that's happening in Los Angeles, that it's not up to the 18th century the artist had to move to the court to do their stuff, and now the galleries have to move to the artists. And the artists are so powerful. Think of like Hauser Wirth with Paul McCarthy, Mark Bradford, Sterling Ruby, and so on. There's so many artists, and also many, I'm not a gallerist myself, but many old artists where they have to secure estates or also to make sure that their artist has a representation. For example, John Baldessari, who worked with Margot Levin, a wonderful lady and gallerist on the West Side, who closed her gallery a few years ago. Baldessari needs a gallery in Los Angeles, and I think these have been some of the reasons why Sproutmagers and Hauser Wirth Schimmel, I mean, I'm not talking for them on their behalf, but why they might have considered opening a space there.
Yeah, I mean, I made a list of
yeah.
a dozen really important, recognized artists who didn't have galleries at home in Los Angeles. And I was even surprised that I could keep on adding names to the list. Barbara Kruger, Eliza Liu. A number of them had been represented briefly by L&M Arts, which closed their... so we also have a history, as you said, of galleries opening from another location and closing. Does anybody have any predictions for how long
Well,
Magers or...
I was just going to say, inversely, for us being in LA, I think a challenge for us has been to internationalize our program, because being in LA, we've had a focus on California and Los Angeles artists because there's just so many good artists there. And they're just right there, and we have a very kind of personal touch to our representation. And so it's been sort of a slower build for us to have a fully international program. I mean, we have an international, art fair roster. We have international clients, but as far as our stable of artists, so it's sort of the inverse of what you were talking about, Philipp.
So you're saying that most of your stable is from Los Angeles?
It's been pretty much, I would say, most years it's a majority. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things about proximity that's great is to have, for young artists, for any artist, is to be able to go to the galleries and look at a lot of art. So that's going to change the dialogue, and that really, so everything expands on everything else.
And sorry, just to add that, on every level, I think that's really important that we don't forget that. And I think that's also why Los Angeles is becoming so important. It's not only Sproutmagers and Schimmelhauser Wirth, it's also on the level of independent artist spaces, initiatives by young artists. There are many, many young galleries, and they're popping up like mushrooms all over the place. It's really hard to keep track with the names, because they all have complicated names. It's not regular names anymore.
True.
and they just pop up, and then they close after 3 months or move. And I think it's crucial that this kind of development happens on every level, and it's not only on the high markets oligarch level.
But I think you still need an important base to support these smaller galleries, and I think that's remains a problem in LA. But I do want to talk about Hauser Wirth and Schimmel, and yes, the proximity to the artists, but I also think they look at LA, and again, I don't know if this is the truth, but this is just from my perspective, is that they look at LA as this city, this place for great experimentation. And so here they are experimenting with what a gallery could be. And I think execution, they've done a phenomenal job, because if you look at what they've done, is they are kind of becoming their own lifestyle brand. They have their own restaurant. They have their own hotel. They have their own bookstore. So they've curated.
Hotel?
Oh, yes. They have a hotel in the UK. Or maybe it's in Scotland. They have a hotel in Scotland. So they are curating the entire experience, culture experience.
That's scary.
Food, hotel, hospitality. So in many ways, I think that's very exciting. And I think, they look at LA as let's experiment. So with the proximity, I think the whole experimentation is really exciting.
You said it was scary, Lita.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's so massive and so, in a way, corporate. It's great, but it's a little overwhelming.
Yeah, they mimic also the institutional on a very professional level. For example, House of Art Schimmel is open on Sundays.
Yes.
It's the same
Yes.
opening hours
Yes.
like the Geffen at MoCA. So when you go
Yes.
to MoCA, you can go over to the gallery and buy an artwork.
They have an education department at a
Yes.
gallery.
Many lectures.
So as and the same education head who was at MoCA
From MoCA,
previously,
yeah.
we all know, followed Paul Schimmel.
It is great. It is great. It's
It's interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
I was there last week and it was packed.
Yeah.
I mean, people carrying around their book bags from the bookstore. We ate lunch there on our way to do a Henry Taylor studio visit, which was phenomenal. You could really see how people were engaged in using the courtyard, hanging out there for hours at a time. So there is something where also when you describe the size of the space, the 100,000 square feet, it almost sounds more oppressive and monolithic than it is. That the architecture is actually working out pretty well, I think, in terms of the shows that they've done, giving them different kinds of spaces, and then interior, exterior spaces for people to actually.
Well, and one thing that LA does sometimes suffer from is the interest in the new. Anything new, everybody goes to it. And I've been shocked at the lines at the Broad are still at the Broad. And like you're saying, Hauser and Wirth Schimmel's packed. And I don't think that it will totally disappear, but the Broad's an interesting example because MoCA's right across the street and doesn't necessarily have the lines
And
out the door to get in.
The Broad and Hauser, Wirth, and Schimmel have something in common. They're both free.
Right. Is
I mean, that
MoCA
is
not
something.
free? That's
MoCA's not
interesting. The Hammer's free now.
And the Broad
Okay.
has used their money wisely to do some studies of their visitors, and they
Right.
have found an average age visitor like in their early 30s.
Right.
Like
It's
31.
34.
That's 20.
Wow.
34,
34,
and it's only like 30% white.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that's
Okay,
extraordinary.
it's like
Well,
more
Philipp, your
it's more
show
diverse.
cost, though, right? Didn't
No, but
your
it's-
show cost?
No, but it's really interesting that it's actually more diverse the audience than at LACMA, which is the county
Oh, wow.
museum, and no one really talks about that. But I think we should also mention because I'm curating the inaugural exhibition at the Marciano Foundation, and Maurice and Paul Marciano, who are based in Los Angeles, and Maurice has been the chair of the MoCA board for quite a while, and he bought this amazing early 60s Masonic temple on Wilshire, and he's transforming it with Kulapat into a museum, and it's going to open in the spring. We just announced it this week, and I'm only doing the inaugural exhibition there, but I'm very excited about that. And what Thao mentioned, the question is who buys all this art? So Maurice is someone who buys a lot of young art and really supports the art scene in Los Angeles, but I think, and his museum will also be for free, so it really creates. He's interested in kind of creating or establishing like a Kunsthalle type
that's fantastic.
for Los Angeles. So it's not going to compete, and he really doesn't want to compete with MoCA, where he's the chair, obviously, but also not with the Hammer Museum. And he just adds something to the fabric. And I think it got very blurry, between the institutional, commercial, private, and public. But the question is also, having worked at MoCA for like 6 years, I mean, MoCA is a non-profit institution, but of course it's also half private. I mean, it's complicated anyway in the United States, I think, to make this distinction. And it's also not necessary, probably.
Well, that will change the scene to have
Yeah.
a Kunsthalle there. Wow.
And then Elsa Longhauser, just to add that too, who was the head of the Santa Monica Art Museum that closed about 2 years ago, I think. And she's opening the new ICA in downtown Los Angeles. So she gave up her Santa Monica Art Museum, moved to downtown, also because of Schimmelhauser Wirth and all the activities down there. And I think they're slated to open next summer.
Also with Kulapat's also doing that space
Yes.
too, I think.
Yeah. But then it does go back to the funding, right? Like,
Yeah.
can the galleries support this phenomenal influx?
Yeah.
Can collectors support?
I think that there are still a lot of what I call secret collections in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
There's some pretty people
Tell us
outside.
about the secret
well, I can't
collections of
tell
Los
you all the
Angeles.
secrets, but But something like the Marcianos will now be more public, and people will see what an incredible collection that is. And they've been written about, so I think that the international art world knows about that collection, but they've been collecting for decades that people didn't know about what they were collecting.
Do you think there are collectors who are not involved at the museum level, for example? You know, because I feel like most collectors, even if they're private and that they don't have a foundation yet,
Right.
they're on the board of the Hammer, Lacquer,
No, they are,
Mocha.
and this is a. Can I
Or
say
is
something?
there another group of collectors we really truly
Well,
don't know about?
David Geff and Michael Ovitz are on no board in Los Angeles,
That's true.
which I think you can only do that in LA, and which has always been a huge disappointment for me as a curator, being at LA MoCA and thinking they're amazing.
Perpetual disappointment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's bad, because I think they're so amazing collectors, but obviously it's not only their problem, it's also the problem of the institutions that they weren't able to engage them. But it's surprising.
How many
I agree,
No, but-
Philip.
For
That's
sure.
exactly true. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that are not on boards that that it would benefit the LA community if they were.
Yeah.
And less public figures. I mean, because their collections are so well known. But there's
Oh,
smaller.
I think absolutely, and I think that there are some people that are still, and I'm talking like modern collections as well, not just like the hot young contemporary artists, but I do think they're involved. They are philanthropic, but they're not on a board. They might be on like the director's circle or something like that. So I think the museums know who they are, but as far as the sort of what we're talking about and something about reading an article about these collections, you're not going to see that. So. But that still begs the question of, can LA support all these artists and galleries? Can the galleries support themselves on the local scene?
Yeah, I think what was really interesting, I had a conversation with Paul Schimmel a long time ago, and he said, we're selling, maybe it's differently now, but he said we're selling through London and New York, but the cameras are on in Los Angeles. And I think it's very true. I mean, you have your flagship store on Rodeo Drive or in
Right.
Tokyo because it's cool and you need to be there. And I think this is a part of the
That's
discussion.
the new, right, that is part of the discussion, because that's the new thing of being global,
Exactly.
the global gallery,
And to be in the right place.
to be in the right place, right, to have the press in one, and that's a very 21st
Do we
century.
think that's true of some homegrown galleries as well, Mary Leigh, or
Okay.
Michael Cohn? Do we think that even, the kind of native LA galleries are making their most important sales outside of LA?
Well, Blum and Poe now has New York and Tokyo, so, but they still sell a lot in LA.
And there was the moment where everyone seemed to open a branch in Berlin.
Right.
That moment's gone.
I think that's gone.
Right, that was a moment.
But
But
it
artists
wasn't,
are
it wasn't
still
just about
moving to
Berlin. It was
Berlin.
about the entire
That's
European,
interesting.
reaching European collectors.
And yeah, we do a lot of European
Can you give us
fairs.
some rough sense, your sales, what percent come from California versus
Well,
beyond?
Well,
Yeah.
when we first started 10 years ago, I use this when I talk to graduate courses. Cherry and Martin did not pay monthly California sales tax because we didn't reach
Exactly.
that amount. We paid quarterly sales tax for about 2 or 3 years. So that's from 2006 to like 2008. I mean, now we pay monthly sales tax. So we have enough California sales to require that. But we started off with a majority of our sales being continental Europe, I would say.
Well, that's really interesting because it does bring it back to the art fairs and sales through the art fairs, that the fairs is what supports the galleries, perhaps.
Sort of.
No, I don't know.
Sort of.
No, but that's a good question. To what extent do the galleries depend on the fairs? To
Yeah.
what extent do they depend on their local community base? And then the fairs that come to LA looking for that local community base and how they're disappointed. Will LA continue to be a graveyard for art fairs?
But I think we're talking about distribution of artworks, I mean, physically or financially, but on the other hand, it's also the distribution. How do all these artists make their way back to Europe, for example? And I feel that there has been like an increasing number of curators coming to Los Angeles, and many of them are contacting me because I'm the European guy. I mean, there's some others now also in Los Angeles, and I really appreciate it whenever they contact me because I can kind of revise my own mindset, what's really meaningful and interesting here. But I feel when you're like more or less successful in Los Angeles, it goes so quick, and then you have your show in a Kunsthalle, in a Kunstverein in Düsseldorf, or in Germany or somewhere in Europe. I mean, there's a lot of attention at the moment. There's so many curators coming to Los Angeles every day. And even if the galleries probably don't benefit directly from the acquisitions, but it benefit, like, on a long-term basis, it's of course super beneficial for the artist careers in the galleries.
Yeah, we do. I mean, Philip, not you, Philip, but Philip Martin, my partner, was in Europe like 3 or 4 times in the last 3 months with artists strictly to go to their major shows. So I think we do benefit from that. And even especially the artists so our booth has 3 LA artists, 1 estate and 2 artists in the early 70s. And for example, they've had major European shows lately. And so it helps us.
I want to ask one last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Is there a downside? Is there something to be aware of to the kind of gallery expansion we've been discussing, to the growth that's occurred? Whether it's real estate prices or something else, I don't know.
Do you mind if I start? I was going to say, I'm not sure if there is exactly a downside yet. I think the downside would be if this is sort of a trend and LA's the Mexico City of this year or something, which I don't believe it is. So I don't think that there is a downside. I was talking, what I mentioned to you last week, an upside for us at the gallery has been, so not just an influx of say, artists and curators from around the world, but an influx of a labor force that has not exactly existed in Los Angeles. So when LA, you're growing your gallery and you want a gallery director or an associate salesperson, something like that. It's actually been difficult for us to find someone with a kind of tiered resume of experiences. And so if they've been in LA for a long time. And now, I mean, we've hired a person recently or last year from New York and a person from London. So that both were directors or worked in other galleries in different places. And that was not happening before. So I think a positive has been that it's been an influx of people from all over that have the different global experiences that we're looking for. So not just the artists and the curators, but also the people that are manning the galleries.
Challenges. I mean, a downside might have sounded too negative to take on directly.
Thao, you
but
wanna go?
any
No, let's talk
challenges?
about-
What are the challenges ahead now that LA is at this particular moment in time?
Thao, do you want to say something? You want to go first?
Sure.
Too many openings.
I don't know where to begin.
Too many
Downsides.
parties to go to.
No, I mean, for us, I don't really see a big particular downside because, again, it's great that the galleries are coming here. There's new ideas, more cultural production.
You have some competition now on the agency front where there are
Sure.
agencies trying out different things. We don't know what they're doing yet.
Yeah, but I think, it's a very different strategy. It's like, I think, the other agency doesn't want to be a gallery, but they are a gallery. And we don't want to be a gallery. It's not within the agency's DNA or business model to be a gallery. It's like we facilitate ideas and we disseminate them in pop culture. We're not interested in primary sales.
But you've also been building a pretty remarkable collection
Yeah,
for a number of years.
Sure.
It's a true, intentional collection.
Yeah, because, our collection is very focused on supporting California artists, supporting arts education, supporting production in California. So, that's how we've built our collection, based on those 2 premises.
Well, I think what we're experiencing now are all like signs of professionalization of the field on many levels. And when you, institutionally, for example, Los Angeles is such a young place. LACMA just turned 50. MoCA, started in around 1980 or in the late 70s. It was initiated, the Hammer even later. And coming from Europe, I mean, I always felt this is awkward. There's this freedom on one hand, but there's also this kind of Wild West mentality, to renegotiate the institutional mission, for example. And sometimes traditionalism can be good and beneficial for museums, you know, because they have a very clear core mission. But I feel this signs of professionalization. Yeah, there are more dinners. You know, there used to be openings in Los Angeles are extremely casual, and I really like that about LA. You don't have to wear a jacket and stuff, and everyone goes there. And sometimes they're like on Sunday afternoons, which I think is extremely awkward to go there on a Sunday afternoon.
Sunday barbecue opening, right?
Sunday barbecue, and then you drink a beer at 4 o'clock.
I was-
And they do that, and it's completely different. It's like a kind of, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but it is kind of a lifestyle thing. And I hope this is not going to change so quickly, because if it feels, even there are all these big galleries, but it's still a nice community that is extremely generous with each other.
I've been given the cue that we want to open it up now to questions from the audience, if there are any. And I can't
Hi.
quite see.
I've been spending a bit of time in LA, and I used to go when I worked in entertainment, and I started going again now that I work in art, which is becoming entertainment. And what I'm curious about is, you know, people like Shamim Momin moved out. There was like a mass exodus of New Yorkers that went to LA, and they sort of all move into their own neighborhoods and pockets. But is there any artist-run centers besides the one that's near UTA downtown? Like, is there any kind of effort, or is it even possible for there to be this slightly more organic art culture that's not corporate culture? It's not Housemore Shimmerl or LACMA or, you know, all
Yeah.
these brands that we're talking about seem like outposts, like LMVH shops. They don't feel like real art anything, you know? And
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering how can the corporate community give back and create something more genuine than tearing down the most beautiful art institute I've seen in the world. I love LACMA. I don't know why they're tearing it down, why they're not preserving it. They should be they're in the business of collecting architecture, like, you know, Lautner houses, but then they tear that down. Like, I don't really get LA. It seems almost schizophrenic to me. So
There are
I
a
don't
lot
know.
of questions in there, but I think the one I wanted to talk about is what's happening with artist-run spaces. There's a lot happening with that, and one of the, and also some funding for it. There's a woman who runs, the name of her, I think it's called the Los Angeles Museum. It's got a very corporate name, but it's an artist-run space, and she received a $100,000 not a grant, it was like an award from the Hammer Museum. She was part of an exhibit at the Hammer.
Alice Konitz.
Thank you, Alice Konitz. She's actually a colleague of mine at Art Center. And that's really extraordinary. And being at Art Center and seeing what the students are doing, they're all of them are very, very involved in artist-run spaces.
I had the chance to write for the New York Times. I think it was also tied to Hammer Biennial, but to write about K-Chung, which is an artist-run radio station. And they use the radio station as an alternative art space in an interesting way. And so many artists are programming shows of, you know, whether it's sound art or interviews or performance of different kind. I think there are an extraordinary number of artist-run spaces.
Lots.
And I just heard that Michael Nedholty got a grant. Yep, more questions? Got a grant from Creative Capital or the Andy Warhol Foundation to write a book on micro-institutions
Really?
in
That's
Los
fantastic.
Angeles. So I think the challenge is learning more about them. 'Cause
Yeah.
There's no
Yes.
map to them.
Yes.
So you should check out the Underground Museum. It's the greatest
Absolutely.
artist-run space. The Underground Museum.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next question, please. Thank you.
When you talk about the sprawl of Los Angeles and the fact that most people spend more time in their cars than they do in their homes, could you just tell us a bit about the opportunities and maybe the limitations for public art in Greater Los Angeles?
The limitations?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of public art, but Lita should take this question because you've done quite a bit of important
have.
public artworks, but I worked for the City of Santa Monica Cultural Affairs, which has an award-winning public art collection, and it's kind of a hobby to me now. And I have artists, of course, that do public art, but we do it through the gallery. But Lita, you want to talk about that? Because I think it's a great place. There needs to be more.
Yeah, I think, I find that I started doing public art about 20 years ago, I think, and there was a lot going on there. I think it's shifted some, and they need a lot more. There needs to be more. We certainly have the spaces. It's definitely something that is happening. Like you mentioned, the Santa Monica Arts Commission gives grants to artists, and there's a lot happening there. I'm not sure I answered the question. What was your question?
Yeah, I think I also heard that LA Mocha, but that is planning to work with the billboards. And of course, there's this project going on at the Beverly Center right now. Sharon Locker did a piece. It's these big billboards. And of course, it's challenging in a city like Los Angeles, where you're mainly sitting behind the windshield and you see the artworks. I mean, there are some public art pieces in Beverly Hills. There's some initiatives. I mean, there's this amazing, the Stewart collection. You talk about Greater Los Angeles. In La Jolla, for example, some colleges are doing public art projects.
And my theory, which I think I shared with Javier, is that the fact that there's so many municipalities has really made it difficult to get a public art support group off the ground. So we don't have anything nearly as robust as Creative Time or Public Art Fund.
Exactly. We don't
And
have
once
that
upon a
kind of
time-
institution.
You know,
Yeah,
once
I
upon
wish
a
we
time,
did.
Bettina Korek was trying to fill that role,
Yeah.
or Lori Furstenberg at LAX Art, and yet I watched them struggle with the bureaucracies of
The
Culver
city.
City, West Hollywood, Los Angeles, Santa Monica.
Inglewood,
There's
yeah,
so many
so
different
many.
municipalities that's one thing.
Yeah.
Just one factor making it more difficult.
Yeah, but you have land who's
Exactly.
now
Does
Right.
quite a
And
bit.
And also-
focusing
land
on
is-
public
is
art
stepping up.
across
Mhm.
all these different municipalities. So
That's right.
land has done a great
Yeah,
job
I
as
think
well.
I think it's a challenge navigationally and then fundraising wise.
But there are initiatives also, like Amy Fontana, for example. She had this West of Rome initiative that stopped
yeah.
about 2 or
That was
3 years
great.
ago, but it was amazing.
Absolutely. But that is what's needed, something like the public fund in New
Other
York.
questions? We are wrapping this up. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for joining
Jori.
me on stage.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you.
joining us on one of the last days of the fair. And
Come to LA.
exactly.